Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more powerful real-life stories that restore your faith in humanity. The cold hit harder that morning than usual in Maple Hill. A soft layer of snow covered the narrow streets, and the wind carried that sharp Midwest sting that got into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. Inside a dusty old garage at the edge of town, Ethan Brooks was hunched over a rusty carburetor, his breath visible in the frigid air. The heater hadn't worked properly in weeks, but he'd long since learned to live with the cold. It was just another thing that didn't work in his life, and like everything else, he patched it the best he could and kept moving. Then came the sound, metal scraping pavement, followed by a dull thud. Ethan looked up, frowning. That wasn't a sound you ignored, not in a place this quiet. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, squinting into the pale gray light. At the far end of the lot, just beside the frozen curb, a boy, maybe 10 years old, was struggling to move a battered wheelchair. One of the front wheels was turned sideways, locked in place. Every time he pushed forward, the chair jerked to one side and skidded on the icy concrete. The boy's face was flushed from the cold and the effort. His hands were bare. Behind him stood a woman, early 30s, wrapped in a thin diner uniform jacket, her eyes wide with helplessness. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Ethan crossed the lot quickly. "Hey there, champ," he said, kneeling beside the chair. "Looks like this thing's giving you some trouble." The boy looked up at him, his lip trembling. "It broke. I just wanted to go down the block. It got stuck, and then the wheel." His voice faded into sniffles. Ethan nodded gently. "Let me take a look." The woman stepped forward, her voice tight. "Sir, we can't afford repairs right now. I was hoping maybe someone at the diner could help later, but..." Ethan held up a hand. "Don't worry about it," he said, offering a quiet smile. "I'm not charging you a dime." The woman blinked. "You sure?" "Positive. Some things matter more than money." She hesitated, then gave a grateful nod as Ethan gently lifted the front of the wheelchair and examined the twisted axle. "Name's Ethan," he said to the boy. "I'm Liam," the boy replied quietly. "Well, Liam," Ethan said, standing up with a grunt, "let's see if we can't get you rolling again." He wheeled the chair inside, the warm light of the garage flickering to life behind him. Two strangers left standing in the snow, not yet realizing they just stepped into something that would change all their lives. Inside the garage, the cold still lingered, but it was at least out of the wind. The space was cluttered, half an engine block on one side, a pile of old tires leaning against the wall, and tools scattered like breadcrumbs across a well-worn workbench. It smelled of oil, metal, and something vaguely burnt. Ethan wheeled Liam's chair over the cracked concrete floor, setting it beside the only work lamp that still worked reliably. He crouched down again, examining the damage with a practiced eye. The front axle was twisted nearly 90 degrees, the brake line on the right was frayed, and the frame itself had a subtle but dangerous bend near the base. Not just wear and tear, this chair had been through something. "How long's it been giving you trouble?" Ethan asked, voice calm. Liam shrugged. "A while. Mom tried to fix it with duct tape." "I admire the effort," Ethan said with a half-smile. "But we're gonna need more than tape." Hannah stood near the doorway, her hands tucked under her arms. Her jacket, thin and frayed at the sleeves, did nothing against the chill. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe insist they didn't want to impose, but she stayed quiet, just watching. Ethan walked to the back of the garage, rummaged through a heap of old bicycle frames, and came back with a piece of metal tubing that had just the right curve. He clamped it to the bench, measuring it against the bent wheelchair part, then started sawing, slow, steady strokes echoing in the quiet. Liam watched from a stool nearby, eyes wide, legs dangling motionless. "You always fix stuff like this?" he asked. Ethan didn't look up. "Mostly cars. Sometimes lawnmowers. Once, a jukebox." "A jukebox?" Liam's eyes lit up. "Did it work?" Played Elvis when I was done. Shook the whole diner, Ethan chuckled. Scared the cook half to death. That drew a laugh from the boy, a light, clear sound that caught Hannah off guard. She blinked, and for a moment, her lips trembled like she might cry. After another 20 minutes of silence and focused labor, Ethan disappeared into the back and returned holding 2 steaming mugs. I don't have much, he said, handing one to Hannah and one to Liam. But I make a mean cup of instant cocoa. Hannah took it gratefully, her fingers trembling around the warm ceramic. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan only nodded, already back at the workbench, sleeves rolled up, grease on his cheek. For the next 4 hours, he worked without stopping, heating, reshaping, welding, tightening. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And more than that, it was kind. From his stool, Liam watched every move, the flicker of admiration quietly growing in his eyes. The final bolt clicked into place just as the sun began to dip behind the maple trees lining the edge of town. Ethan stepped back, wiped the sweat and grease from his brow, and took a long look at the work in front of him. The wheelchair didn't just look repaired, it looked reborn. He'd replaced the bent front axle with a reinforced bike tubing, carefully filed down for a perfect fit. The brakes, now responsive and smooth, had been completely rewired using parts scavenged from an old go-kart that had sat forgotten behind the shop for years. The tires, thicker and more durable, came off an abandoned mountain bike. He'd even added extra padding to the seat using leftover upholstery foam and stitched the torn fabric by hand, the thread uneven but strong. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't store-bought. But it was solid. Strong. And it would roll. Ethan turned toward Liam, who had been patiently watching from the stool, Coco long gone, his small fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of his coat. All right, buddy, Ethan said softly, moment of truth. He wheeled the chair forward, holding the handles like it was something sacred. The metal glinted beneath the overhead light. The rubber tires whispered across the floor, smooth and steady. Liam's eyes widened. That's mine. Ethan nodded. Want to take her for a spin? Hannah stood frozen by the door, clutching the now empty mug, her breath caught in her throat. Liam slid off the stool with a little help and settled into the newly padded seat. He placed his hands on the wheels cautiously, as if unsure they'd obey him. Then he pushed, just a little. The chair glided forward, smooth as glass. Liam's face transformed. His mouth opened in shock, then broke into a wide, unrestrained smile. He spun the chair around in a slow, giddy circle, then pushed across the garage and back again. It works, he shouted. It's better than before. It's so easy. Ethan grinned. She's got some muscle in her now. You'll be flying around corners. Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. She walked forward slowly, her other hand reaching for Ethan's. She took it in both of hers and held on tightly. You don't know what you've done, she said, her voice breaking. You gave him freedom again. Ethan looked down, almost embarrassed. It's what I do. I fix things. No, she whispered, shaking her head. This is more than that. He gave her a tired smile, the kind that carried warmth despite a long day's exhaustion. Sometimes, he said, glancing at Liam spinning joyfully, doing the right thing is payment enough. And for a moment, in that old, cold garage filled with rust and noise and second-hand parts, something pure bloomed, like warmth in winter. 3 days later, Maple Hill was back to its usual pace, slow, quiet, and comfortably predictable. The cold had softened just enough for the snow to melt into slush along the curbs, leaving behind a thin gray haze in the air. Ethan was bent over the hood of an old F-150, hands deep in the engine bay, trying to coax a stubborn spark plug into cooperation. The truck's owner, a retired farmer named Clive, stood nearby with a thermos, chatting about the rising price of feed like it was breaking news. Then came the sound. It wasn't a car. Not a tractor. Not even one of the occasional crop dusters that passed overhead in summer. This was different, Deep, low, powerful. The kind of sound that made the air vibrate and set off a barking chain reaction from every dog in a 5-mile radius. Ethan straightened up slowly, his brow furrowed. "You hear that?" Clive paused, tilting his head. "Well, that ain't something you hear out here." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, walked to the edge of the lot, and looked toward the direction of the noise, the small airstrip just past the ridge. It had been there for decades, mostly used for emergency medical flights or the occasional hobbyist with a beat-up Cessna. But today, a jet was coming down. A sleek, silver private jet glided across the sky like it didn't belong anywhere near this town. Its engines roared as it touched down, wheels stirring up a cloud of dust from the frozen gravel runway. The jet taxied to a stop at the far end of the strip, gleaming like chrome against the dull winter landscape. Ethan blinked. That can't be right. Before he could process it further, a second noise reached his ears, the unmistakable purr of a luxury engine. From the far end of the road, turning past the diner and rolling down Main Street like it owned the place, came a black Lincoln sedan. Brand new. Polished to a mirror finish. Its tinted windows reflected the cloudy sky, and it moved with the smoothness of something expensive and deliberate. Ethan's stomach turned. No one in Maple Hill drove cars like that. Heck, no one in the next 3 towns over did either. The Lincoln made a slow, calculated turn into Ethan's lot. Clive whistled low. "Looks like someone's got important company." Ethan didn't answer. His hands were suddenly clammy despite the cold. Something about the whole thing felt off. Not dangerous. Just big. Bigger than anything he'd ever dealt with. The car came to a stop. The engine cut. And then the rear passenger door opened with a soft click. Ethan took a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Something was about to change. The door of the Lincoln opened, and a man stepped out with the calm precision of someone used to drawing attention. He wore a dark overcoat over a tailored suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his posture straight and unhurried. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, composed. He scanned the garage surroundings like he was assessing blueprints. Then came the second figure. Older. Silver hair combed neatly back, face weathered but firm, a quiet authority radiating from the way he moved. He didn't smile. Didn't need to. His presence filled the space like a rising tide. Ethan instinctively wiped his hands on a shop towel, suddenly all too aware of the grease on his sleeves and the smudge on his cheek. The first man approached, extending a hand. "Mr. Brooks?" "Ethan Brooks." Ethan nodded slowly, still unsure if he was dreaming. "That's me. I'm Marcus Langston. I represent Mr. Robert Chambers," he said, turning slightly to gesture at the older man now stepping fully into view. "May we have a moment of your time?" Ethan looked between them, then toward Clive, who had wisely decided to vanish around the side of the building. The lot was still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Yeah. Sure," Ethan said, clearing his throat. Robert Chambers stepped forward and studied Ethan with the quiet intensity of a man who measured people quickly and precisely. His voice, when it came, was deep and deliberate. "You recently repaired a wheelchair. A boy named Liam." Ethan's heart skipped. "Yeah, I did. Didn't think much of it. Just figured he needed it." Robert nodded once. "He did. Desperately. That boy is my grandson." Ethan blinked. "Wait, what?" "My daughter is Hannah," Robert continued. "We haven't spoken in years. Not since, well, that's another matter. But a few days ago, she called me. She told me what you did. How you helped her son. How you refused payment. How you rebuilt the chair from scraps, stayed up working in the cold, gave them cocoa." He paused, eyes never leaving Ethan's. "She said you gave Liam something no money could buy. Dignity. Independence." Ethan shifted on his feet, caught off guard by how heavy those words felt. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said quietly. I know, Robert replied. That's why I'm here. There was a long silence between them, two men from opposite ends of the world, standing on cracked concrete under a gray sky. I don't believe in debts, Mr. Brooks, Robert said finally. But I do believe in honoring the good. And I'd like to speak with you about something that may change your life. Ethan's gaze flicked toward the black car, then back to the man in front of him. Okay, he said slowly. I'm listening. They stepped into the garage, Ethan motioning them in, suddenly self-conscious about the chipped paint, the flickering overhead bulb, and the permanent smell of oil and metal that clung to the air like memory. Marcus stood off to the side, silent and alert, while Robert paced slowly, taking in the worn tools, the half-assembled engine on the bench, the small space Ethan had built with his hands over the years. This place, Robert said softly, tells me everything I need to know about you. Ethan chuckled under his breath. What messy, outdated, and freezing. Robert smiled faintly. No. Honest. Practical. Built by someone who works with care. He turned, face settling into something more formal. Mr. Brooks, I didn't come here just to thank you. I came to offer you a position, one I don't offer lightly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A position? We're building a new facility outside Boulder, Robert continued. A state-of-the-art center for mobility engineering. My company has been developing cutting-edge technology, smart wheelchairs, adaptive limbs, voice-activated systems, but we need people who understand more than just the machinery. We need people who understand people, their needs, their dignity. He nodded toward the corner of the garage, where Liam's old, broken chair still leaned against the wall. What you did with that chair told me you have both the skill and the heart. Ethan didn't know what to say. He shifted awkwardly, the weight of the moment pressing down like a new engine block. Robert reached into his coat pocket and handed him a dark leather envelope. Ethan opened it carefully, hands stained with grease, fingertips trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of thick, high-grade paper. The header bore the name of one of the most respected medical tech companies in the country. Below it, a contract. Job title. Relocation package. Full housing. Health benefits. And a salary that made Ethan's throat tighten. This can't be real, he muttered. It's very real, Robert said. You'd be leading a team. Designing. Innovating. Making things better for people like Liam. You'd have resources most engineers only dream of, and the freedom to build as you see fit. Ethan lowered the paper slowly. But I'm just a small-town mechanic. Robert's expression didn't waver. And that's exactly why I want you. Because you didn't do what you did for money, or glory. You did it because it was right. That kind of integrity can't be taught. It's earned, over years of showing up, doing the work, and caring when no one's watching. The garage went quiet again, except for the distant ticking of a cooling engine. Ethan looked at the contract, then at Robert, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Robert replied gently. And if your answer is yes, you'll never have to fix another carburetor in the cold again, unless you want to. That night, the garage was quieter than usual. No hammers. No buzzing tools. Just the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of metal contracting in the cold. Outside, the wind had picked up again, sweeping through Maple Hill like it always did this time of year, whistling through gaps in windows, rattling the old tin roof. Ethan sat alone at his workbench, elbows resting on the scarred surface, the contract from Robert Chambers lying flat in front of him like it was made of gold, or maybe dynamite. He stared at it for a long time, eyes tracing the lines of text he'd already read 10 times. The numbers were staggering. The position, unreal. And yet, it wasn't the money or the title that made his chest tighten. It was the question behind it all. Why me? He reached for his coffee mug, cold now, and took a sip anyway. Then he leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the old calendar hanging by the fuse box. It was still stuck on November. He hadn't bothered to flip it. This place, he muttered to himself. He looked around, the same cluttered shelves, the same oil-stained floor, the same heater that rattled every time it turned on. He'd built a life here. Not much, maybe. But it was honest. And it was his. And now someone was asking him to leave it behind. To step into a world of lab coats and glossy buildings, of boardrooms and funding proposals. It all sounded so far from the simple rhythm of his life. Turn a wrench, fix what's broken, make someone's day a little easier. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, rough palms catching in his scalp. Do I even belong in a place like that? What if I fail? What if I get there and they realize I'm just some guy who taught himself to weld with a propane torch and a YouTube video? The doubt clawed at him, quiet but relentless. And beneath it all a deeper fear, one he hadn't spoken out loud. If I leave, am I abandoning this town? The people who trust me? Who come to me not because I'm the best, but because I'm here? He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, eyes fixed on the contract once more. It would be so easy to sign. One stroke of the pen, and life would change. But sometimes, the hardest part wasn't taking a risk, it was believing you were allowed to. That you deserved something better. Ethan sat there a long time, the shop lights casting soft yellow pools around him, the night pressing in at the windows. The garage had never felt so big. Or so small. He didn't move. Didn't decide. He just breathed, and waited, and listened to the silence of a life on the edge of changing. The next afternoon, the sky over Maple Hill was a pale silver, the kind of overcast that made the world feel quiet and slowed. Ethan was in the middle of rotating tires on a rusted-out sedan when he heard the soft whir of wheels on pavement. He looked up, and there they were. Liam, bundled in a thick coat and wool hat, was gliding across the lot in the very wheelchair Ethan had rebuilt. Behind him, Hannah walked carefully, her hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes fixed on Ethan with something unreadable. "Hey there," Ethan called, brushing off his hands as he stood. Liam beamed and rolled right up to him. "Hi, Mr. Ethan. Chair holding up okay?" Ethan asked, kneeling slightly to inspect the wheels. "It's perfect," Liam said proudly. "Better than perfect." Then his voice dropped a little. "Mom told me you might be going away." Ethan paused. "Well, maybe. Nothing's decided yet." Liam bit his lip. "If you go, will you still fix my chair if it ever breaks?" The question hit Ethan in the chest like a wrench to the gut. He blinked, cleared his throat, and smiled gently. "Always, buddy. You bring it to me wherever I am, and I'll make it good as new. Promise." Liam nodded, satisfied, and wheeled a slow circle nearby, humming to himself. Hannah stepped closer, her voice low and steady. "He hasn't stopped smiling since that day, Ethan. Not once. He used to dread going outside. Now he races through the park." Ethan looked at her, unsure what to say. She touched his arm. "You didn't just fix his chair. You changed how he sees the world. You gave him control again." He shrugged, glancing at the boy. He deserved it. "You deserve this offer," she said, more firmly now. "I know you're scared. I can see it. But you need to know something. Liam didn't just get his wheels back. He got his hope back. Because one good man did what no one else would." Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't blink them away. "Don't sell yourself short, Ethan. You think you're just a mechanic, but to us, you were a miracle." Ethan looked down, jaw clenched. It was one thing to be appreciated. It was another to be seen. In Liam's joy. In Hannah's words. In the way his garage, for once, felt like more than just a building full of broken things. It felt like the start of something. He glanced toward the back table where the contract still sat, untouched since the night before. And for the first time, he didn't feel afraid of it. He just felt ready. The invitation came 2 days later in the form of a knock at the garage door just after sunrise. Marcus Langston stood there, dressed in a dark coat with a clipboard under one arm and the same calm look in his eyes. "We'd like you to see it," he said simply. Ethan didn't ask what it was. Something in Marcus's voice told him this wasn't just a tour, it was a moment meant to help him decide. They drove west for hours, the snowy plains gradually giving way to the rising outline of the Rockies. The air felt thinner as they climbed, cleaner somehow, crisper. Ethan stared out the window most of the way, watching the miles pass like pages turning in a book he wasn't sure he was ready to read. When they arrived in Boulder, the sun had broken through the clouds, bathing the sleek, modern facility in gold. The building stood like a promise, walls of glass and steel framed by mountain peaks and pine trees. It didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like the future. Inside, everything hummed with quiet energy. Wide corridors, natural light, rooms filled with bright, focused people, engineers, designers, technicians, many of them barely out of college, some in wheelchairs themselves, all moving with purpose. Marcus guided him through a workshop lined with workbenches and 3D printers, shelves of circuit boards, prototypes in various stages of completion. One table held a gleaming electric wheelchair, no larger than Liam's, but equipped with eye-tracking controls. Another displayed a prosthetic arm that moved in response to neural input. A child wearing a headband was using it to stack blocks. Ethan watched in silence, his breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "They're not just building equipment," Marcus said beside him. "They're building freedom. Opportunity. A way back into the world." In another room, a teenage girl laughed as she stood with the help of powered leg braces, her father crying quietly in the corner. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You think you're just a mechanic," Marcus continued. "But what you did with Liam's chair, it wasn't about the parts. It was about how you saw him. How you treated him. That's what we're missing here." Ethan turned to him. "We have experts," Marcus said. "We have funding. But we don't have enough people who feel what this work means. We don't need another degree. We need a man who cares. Who listens. Who fixes not just the hardware, but the person sitting in it." Ethan looked around again, eyes landing on a wall of photos. Children smiling, running, playing, all wearing devices that had once started as scribbles on these workbenches. "You'd belong here," Marcus said softly. "Even if you don't believe it yet." And for the first time since this whole thing began, Ethan felt something shift inside him, like an engine catching just before ignition. The morning was cool and quiet, the kind of soft golden calm that comes just before a big change, when the world seems to hold its breath, waiting. Ethan stood in the break room of the Boulder facility, staring down at the contract laid out neatly on the table. His flannel sleeves were rolled up, and a smudge of oil still marked the base of his thumb. He hadn't even noticed. Old habits didn't go away overnight. The pen waited beside the page, its weight insignificant compared to the decision it symbolized. Outside the window, snow dusted the peaks in the distance. Down below, in the workshop he'd toured the day before, a small team of engineers was already at work, soldering circuits, testing frames, laughing gently over coffee and code. He could be one of them. He would be, if he signed. Ethan took a breath and let it out slow. For all his doubts, all the nights he'd stared at this exact document under the flickering light of his garage, one truth had finally settled in. The world didn't need him to be perfect. It just needed him to show up with heart and hands willing to build. He picked up the pen. The signature came with quiet finality, a single motion that felt like turning a page in a story he hadn't realized was only just beginning. When he finished, he looked down at the ink drying beside his name, Ethan Brooks. The same name on the garage door back home. The same name now attached to something far bigger than mufflers and gaskets. A name that mattered. Moments later, Marcus met him in the lobby with a quiet nod and handed him a plastic badge, still warm from the printer. It had a picture of him taken just the day before, looking slightly uncomfortable, eyes squinting into the camera, and below it, his name and new title, Lead Mobility Engineer. He turned it over in his hands, then clipped it onto his shirt pocket. The doors to the main facility opened with a soft hiss as he stepped through. Inside, everything buzzed with purpose. A young woman in a lab coat waved as she passed, pushing a prototype walker designed for toddlers. A technician offered him a cheerful morning, as she adjusted a motorized glove for a client waiting patiently nearby. And Ethan, grease under his nails, heart pounding like the first time he turned over an engine, walked into it all like he belonged. Because now, he did. There were still things he didn't know, technologies he didn't understand, machines more advanced than anything he'd touched. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what he didn't know. He was ready to learn. And in the warmth of that morning sun, streaming through the tall windows of a place built on compassion and innovation, Ethan Brooks began again, not just as a mechanic, but as a man who had finally found where he was meant to be. It was a Thursday morning when Ethan heard the sound, soft at first, like the hum of a small electric motor. Familiar, but different. He looked up from the drafting table where he'd been sketching adjustments to a new mobility rig. Down the long corridor, sunlight pouring in through high windows, a figure was speeding toward him with the uncontainable energy of pure joy. "Mr. Ethan." The voice rang out, clear and triumphant. "Look at me." Liam. But not the Liam Ethan remembered struggling across a snowy sidewalk in a broken chair. This Liam was flying. His wheelchair was sleek, custom-built to fit his frame, with shock-absorbing wheels, a joystick interface that responded to the lightest touch, and a deep blue frame that shimmered like polished stone. It moved like it was part of him, not a machine beneath him, but an extension of his spirit. He zipped past technicians and therapists, weaving through the hallway like he owned it, laughter echoing against the walls. Ethan felt his chest tighten in the best possible way. Hannah followed a few steps behind, smiling wide, her eyes already glistening. She carried something in her hand, an envelope, carefully folded and sealed with a sticker of a cartoon rocket ship. When Liam reached Ethan, he came to a sharp, smooth stop and threw his arms in the air. "It's amazing," he shouted. "I can go anywhere." Ethan crouched down beside him, one hand on the wheel hub. "She's a beauty," he said, his voice thick. "You drive her like a pro." "I helped design the paint," Liam added proudly. "I could tell," Ethan smiled. Hannah stepped forward and offered him the envelope. "We wanted to give you this," she said softly. "It's from Liam." Ethan took it, suddenly aware that his hands were trembling. He opened it carefully, unfolding the lined notebook paper inside. In the uneven handwriting of a 10-year-old boy were the words, "Dear Mr. Ethan, thank you for fixing my old chair. But even more, thank you for believing in me. You didn't just fix something. You changed my life. I used to think grown-ups didn't see kids like me. But you did. Now I know I can do anything. Your friend, Liam." Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. The words blurred as his eyes welled. He knelt beside Liam again, hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. "Nobody," he said, voice quiet and rough with emotion. "You've got it backwards." Liam tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "You didn't just change your life," Ethan whispered. "You changed mine." He looked at Hannah, then back at the hallway full of movement, invention, hope. "You helped me believe again, believe that kindness matters, that doing the right thing still means something." Liam grinned. "You're welcome." Ethan laughed through the tears, ruffling the boy's hair. "Keep flying, kid." And as Liam wheeled off down the corridor, his joy echoing like sunlight across tile and glass, Ethan stood still for a moment, hand clutching the letter to his chest. This was why he said yes. This was why he was here. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Justice Reloaded HD, where kindness always finds its way back.